beautiful. That punctual servant of all work, the sun, had just risen on the morning of the 13th of May, 1827, when Mr. Samuel Pickwick burst like another sun from his slumbers, threw open his chamber window, and looked out upon the world beneath. Goswell Street was at his feet. Goswell Street was on his right hand. As far as the eye could reach, Goswell Street extended on his left, and the opposite side of Goswell Street was over the way. Mr. Pickwick proceeded to put himself into his clothes and his clothes into his portmanteau. The operation of shaving, dressing, and coffee imbibing was soon performed, and in another hour Mr. Pickwick, with his portmanteau in his hand, his telescope in his great coat pocket, and his notebook in his waistcoat, had arrived at the coach stand at St. Martin's Le Grand. "Cab," said Mr. Pickwick. "Here you are, sir," shouted a strange specimen of a human race in a sackcloth coat and apron of the same, with a brass label and number round his neck. This was the waterman. "Here you are, sir, and now then, for first cab." On the first cab having been fetched from the public house, Mr. Pickwick and his portmanteau were thrown into the vehicle. "Golden Cross," said Mr. Pickwick. "Only a bob's worth, Tommy," said the driver, sulkily, for the information of his friend, the waterman, as the cab drove off. "How old is that house, my friend?" inquired Mr. Pickwick. 42, replied the driver, eyeing him askant. "What?" ejaculated Mr. Pickwick. Laying his hand upon his notebook, the driver reiterated his former statement. Mr. Pickwick noted down the fact forthwith. "And how long do you keep him out at a time?" inquired Mr. Pickwick. "2 or 3 weeks," replied the man. "Weeks," said Mr. Pickwick in an astonishment, and out came the notebook again. "He lies at Pentonville when he's at home," observed the driver coolly, "but we seldom takes him home on account of his weakness. He always falls down when he's took out over the cab, but when he's in it, we bears him up very tight and takes him in very short, so as he can't very well fall down. And we have got a pair of precious large wheels on, so when he does move, they run after him, and he must go on. He can't help it." Mr. Pickwick entered every word of his statement in his notebook as a singular instance of the tenacity of life in horses under trying circumstances. The entry was scarcely completed when they reached the Golden Cross. Down jumped the driver, and out got Mr. Pickwick, Mr. Tupman, Mr. Snodgrass, and Mr. Winkle crowded to welcome him. "Here's your face," said Mr. Pickwick, holding out the shilling to the driver. What was the learned man's astonishment when that unaccountable person flung the money on the pavement and requested in figurative terms to be allowed the pleasure of fighting him, Mr. Pickwick, for the amount. "Come on," said the cab driver, sparing away like clockwork. "Come on, all four of you. Here's a lark," shouted half a dozen hackney coachmen. "Go to work, Sam," and they crowded with great glee around the party. "What's the row, Sam?" inquired one gentleman in black calico sleeves. "Row," replied the cabman. "What did he want my number for?" "I didn't want your number," said the astonished Mr. Pickwick. "What did you take it for them?" inquired the cabman. "I didn't take it," said Mr. Pickwick indignantly. Would anybody believe," continued the cab driver, appealing to the crowd, "would anybody believe as an informer would go about in a man's cab, not only taking down his number, but every word he says into the bargain? Did he though?" inquired another cabman. "Yes, did he," replied the first, but I'll give it him if I have 6 months for it." Come on," said the cabman, dashed his hat upon the ground, and knocked Mr. Pickwick's spectacles off, and followed up the attack with a blow on Mr. Pickwick's nose, and another on Mr. Pickwick's chest, and a third in Mr. Snodgrass's eye, and a fourth, by way of variety, in Mr. Topman's waistcoat, and finally dashed the whole temporary supply of breath out of Mr. Winkle's body, and all in half a dozen seconds. "You shall smart for this," gasped Mr. Pickwick. "Informers," shouted the crowd. "Come on," cried the cabman, who had been sparring without cessation the whole time. "What's the fun?" said a rather tall, thin young man in a green coat, emerging suddenly from the coach-yard. "Informers," shouted the crowd again. "We are not," roared Mr. Pickwick. "Ain't you, though, ain't you?" said the young man, appealing to Mr. Pickwick and making his way through the crowd. "Come along then. Here, number 924. Take your fare and take yourself off. Respectable gentlemen, know him well. None of your nonsense. This way, sir. Where's your friend? All a mistake. I see. Never mind. Accidents will happen. Best regulated families never say die." And with a lengthened string of similar broken sentences, delivered with extraordinary volubility, the stranger led the way to the traveller's waiting room. "Here, waiter," shouted the stranger, ringing the bell with tremendous violence. "Glasses round, brandy and water, hot and strong, and sweet and plenty. Eye damaged, sir?" "Waiter, raw beef steak for the gentleman's eye." "Nothing like raw beef steak for a bruise, sir." "Could lamppost every good, but lamppost inconvenient. Very odd standing in the open street half an hour with your eye against a lamppost. Very good, ha, ha." And the stranger, without stopping to take breath, swallowed at a draughtful half a pint of the reeking brandy and water, and flung himself into a chair with as much ease as if nothing uncommon had occurred. He was about the middle height, but the thinness of his body and the length of his legs gave him the appearance of being much taller. The green coat had been a smart dress garment in the days of swallowtails, but had evidently in those times adorned a much shorter man than the stranger, for the soiled and faded sleeves scarcely reached to his wrists.